I knew the certified letter was going to be trouble the moment I saw the HOA return address stamped in the corner. My name is Stephen Jacobson, and I have lived on this 50-acre property in rural Jefferson County, Colorado, for nearly 15 years. The land had been in my family for 3 generations, complete with a historic water tower that my grandfather built back in 1952. That tower was not just some relic. It was a fully functional piece of infrastructure that supplied fresh well water to my property, and, through a series of agreements made decades ago, to several neighboring homes that had been built in the valley below. I tore open the envelope standing right there at my mailbox, the afternoon sun beating down on my neck. The letter was printed on official HOA letterhead, signed by one Patricia Morrison, the newly elected president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I read it once, then twice, my blood pressure rising with each word. According to Patricia, my water tower had been reported as an eyesore and a violation of the neighborhood aesthetic standards. I was being ordered to either paint it to match approved color schemes or tear it down within 30 days. The absurdity of it hit me immediately. Meadowbrook Estates was a development that had only been built 7 years ago, long after my family had established our property. The developer had purchased the surrounding land and carved it into neat little lots with cookie-cutter homes. But my 50 acres remained untouched, grandfathered in with all its original structures. The water tower sat on the highest point of my property, visible from some of the newer homes below, but it had been there for over 70 years. How could they suddenly decide it was a problem? I walked back up my gravel driveway, the letter crumpled in my fist. My property was separated from the HOA neighborhood by a good quarter-mile of undeveloped scrubland and a barbed wire fence that marked my boundary. The tower itself was a classic design, steel framework supporting a large cylindrical tank, painted in the weathered white and red that it had worn for decades. Sure, the paint was faded and peeling in places, but it was structurally sound and still did exactly what it was supposed to do. My phone rang as I reached my front porch. It was Martin Chen, one of my neighbors who lived on Pinecrest Drive, right at the edge of the Meadowbrook development. Martin was a good guy, a retired engineer who actually appreciated the history of the area. "Stephen, did you get a letter from the HOA?" Martin asked without preamble. "Just read it. Complete nonsense. They want me to tear down my water tower." I figured. Patricia has been on a rampage lately. She moved in about 6 months ago and got herself elected HOA president within 2 months, been making everyone's life miserable ever since. Martin paused. "You know that tower supplies water to my house and 3 others on my street, right?" "Of course I know. My grandfather set up those agreements with the original property owners back in the 60s. The county water lines do not reach that far up the valley, and drilling individual wells was not practical for those lots. Your properties have easement rights to the water supply." Does Patricia know that? Apparently not. And I am guessing she did not bother to do any research before sending out this letter. Martin let out a low whistle. "This is going to be interesting. Keep me posted, will you? My wife and I definitely do not want to lose our water supply." After hanging up, I dug through my file cabinet until I found the folder containing all the original water rights documentation, easement agreements and maintenance records for the tower. Everything was in order, as it had been for decades. My grandfather had been meticulous about documentation, and I had maintained that tradition. The agreements clearly stated that I was responsible for maintaining the tower and water quality, while the benefiting properties paid a small annual fee to help cover costs. It was a fair arrangement that had worked perfectly for over 60 years. The next morning, I drove down to the Meadowbrook Estates Community Center where the HOA kept an office. It was a small building near the neighborhood entrance, designed to match the bland beige and gray color scheme that apparently defined aesthetic excellence in Patricia's world. I walked in to find a woman in her late 40s sitting behind a desk, her blonde hair cut in that severe style that screamed middle management. She looked up at me with the kind of expression that suggested I was interrupting something far more important than I could possibly imagine. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone making it clear that helping me was the last thing she wanted to do. "I am Stephen Jacobson. I received a letter yesterday about my water tower." Recognition flashed in her eyes, followed by something that looked like satisfaction. "Oh yes. That dreadful structure. It is completely out of keeping with our community standards. I am glad you are here to discuss compliance options." "I am not here to discuss compliance. I am here to inform you that you have no authority over my property. Your HOA boundaries do not extend to my land." Patricia stood up, smoothing down her perfectly pressed blazer. She was probably 5'6", but she carried herself like she was 6 feet tall and in charge of the world. "Mr. Jacobson, while your property may not technically be within our HOA boundaries, that eyesore of a tower is visible from 17 homes in our community. It negatively impacts property values and violates the aesthetic standards that our residents have a right to expect. It has been there for 73 years. Your development is 7 years old. You built next to it, not the other way around." Her eyes narrowed. "That does not give you the right to maintain a decrepit structure that brings down the value of surrounding properties. I have already consulted with our attorney, and we have legal options to pursue if you refuse to comply voluntarily." I placed my folder on her desk and opened it, spreading out the documents. "Before you pursue anything, you might want to look at these. This tower supplies fresh water to 4 homes on Pinecrest Drive. Without it, those properties have no water supply. The county lines do not reach that far, and the cost of extending them or drilling individual wells would be prohibitive." Patricia barely glanced at the papers. "That is not my concern. Those homeowners can make their own arrangements. The tower is still an eyesore and needs to go. Those homeowners are your HOA members, Patricia. Martin and Susan Chen at 847 Pinecrest, Robert and Jennifer Walsh at 851, Doug Martinez at 843, and elderly Grace Thompson at 839. All 4 households depend on my tower for their water." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. "I was not aware of that, clearly. I suggest you do your research before threatening legal action. I have maintained this tower and the water supply in perfect working order for 15 years, just as my father did before me, and my grandfather before him. The agreements are all legal and recorded with the county. You have no grounds to demand anything from me." I gathered up my documents and turned to leave, but Patricia's voice stopped me. "Even if that is true, Mr. Jacobson, the tower is still visible and unsightly. Surely we can reach some kind of compromise. Perhaps you could paint it or add landscaping to screen it from view." I looked back at her. "My property, my tower, my decision. If you have a legal issue with that, take it up with your attorney, but I suggest you talk to your affected members first." The drive home gave me time to cool down, but I had a sinking feeling this was not over. Patricia struck me as the type who did not like being told no, especially not in front of witnesses. The community center had been empty when I arrived, but a couple of residents had walked in during our conversation and definitely overheard the exchange. Sure enough, 3 days later, I received another letter. This one was not from Patricia directly but from the law firm of Henderson and Associates, representing the Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. The legal language was dense, but the message was clear. They were demanding I either remove the tower or bring it into compliance with community standards within 20 days, or they would file for an injunction and seek damages for diminished property values. I called my own attorney, Richard Voss, who had handled my family's legal matters for years. After reading him the letter over the phone, there was a long silence. "Stephen, they do not have a leg to stand on," Richard finally said. "Your property predates their development. Your tower is legally compliant with all county regulations, and you have binding easement agreements with HOA members. This is harassment, plain and simple. So what do I do? Let me draft a response. We will make it very clear that any further harassment will result in a countersuit. In the meantime, I suggest you document everything. Every interaction, every letter, every phone call. If this escalates, we want a paper trail." I spent the next week doing exactly that. I also took the time to inspect the tower thoroughly, documenting its condition with photographs and notes. The structure was solid. I had replaced several support beams 5 years ago and repainted major sections 3 years before that. The water quality was tested quarterly, and every test came back perfect. I maintained detailed logs of everything, just as my grandfather had taught me. Martin Chen called me again on a Friday evening. "Stephen, I just got back from the HOA meeting. You need to know what is happening." "What now?" "Patricia brought up your tower during the open forum. She is telling everyone that you are refusing to maintain it properly, and that it is a danger to the community. She did not mention anything about it supplying water to 4 homes on my street. When I tried to bring it up, she shut me down and said it was not relevant to the discussion. Of course she did. It gets worse. She is proposing that the HOA use emergency funds to extend county water lines to Pinecrest Drive, then sue you for the costs. She claims that once those homes have alternative water sources, there will be no reason to keep your tower standing." I felt my jaw clench. "How much would that cost?" She quoted $80,000, maybe more. And she wants to saddle the HOA with that expense just to spite me. That is what it looks like. A bunch of members pushed back, saying it was a waste of money, but she has her supporters. People who care more about aesthetics than common sense. After hanging up with Martin, I sat on my porch and looked up at the tower silhouetted against the evening sky. It was more than just a structure to me. It represented my family's legacy in this area, my grandfather's ingenuity in solving a water problem that could have prevented any development in the valley. He had not just built something for himself. He had created a resource that benefited the whole community. And now someone who had lived here for less than a year wanted to tear it all down because she did not like how it looked. The weekend passed quietly, but Monday morning brought a new development. A county inspector showed up at my door with a clipboard and an apologetic expression. "Mr. Jacobson, I am Derek Santos from the county building department. I received a complaint about a water tower on your property. I need to do an inspection." I stepped aside and gestured him in. "Be my guest. The tower is up the hill about a quarter mile. I will drive you up." Derek was thorough and professional. He spent over an hour examining the tower from every angle, checking structural integrity, reviewing my maintenance logs, and even testing the water quality himself with a portable kit. When he finished, he shook his head. "Mr. Jacobson, this tower is in excellent condition. Better than some municipal structures I have inspected. Your maintenance records are impeccable. I do not know who filed this complaint, but there are absolutely no violations here. Let me guess. Patricia Morrison from the Meadowbrook HOA." He glanced at his clipboard. "I cannot confirm who filed the complaint, but it did come through an HOA attorney. She is trying to force me to tear it down because she thinks it is ugly. Derek's expression told me he had dealt with similar situations before. Look, I will file my report stating everything is in perfect order. That should put an end to any claims about safety or code violations. What you do with your property beyond that is between you and your attorney. After Derek left, I called Richard again to update him. He was pleased about the inspection results, but concerned about the escalating harassment. "Stephen, I think it is time we went on the offensive. I am going to file a cease and desist order against Patricia Morrison and the HOA. This harassment needs to stop before they waste thousands of dollars of their members' money on frivolous legal action." "Do it," I said. "I am tired of being reasonable with people who refuse to listen." The cease and desist letter was delivered to Patricia on Wednesday. By Thursday afternoon, I had an angry voicemail from her attorney, claiming we were interfering with the HOA's right to protect their members' interests. Richard called him back, and according to Richard, the conversation devolved into a shouting match about property rights and overreach. "Their attorney knows they do not have a case," Richard told me, "but Patricia is the client and she is insisting they pursue this." He essentially admitted that he has advised her to drop it, but she will not listen. Friday brought the next surprise. I was working in my barn when I heard vehicles coming up the driveway. Looking out, I saw two news vans, one from a Denver station and one from a local Colorado Springs outlet. Behind them was Martin's truck. Martin climbed out looking sheepish. "Sorry, Stephen, I might have contacted the media." A reporter approached, a young woman with dark hair and a cameraman in tow. "Mr. Jacobson, I am Rebecca Ortiz from Channel 9 News. We heard about your situation with the HOA. Would you be willing to talk to us?" I hesitated, then figured that sunlight might be the best disinfectant for this situation. "Sure. What do you want to know?" The interview lasted about 20 minutes. I showed them the tower, explained its history and function, and described how the HOA was trying to force me to tear it down despite it supplying water to 4 HOA households. Rebecca was sharp, asking pointed questions about the legal situation and Patricia's response. When I mentioned that the HOA was considering spending $80,000 to extend water lines just to eliminate the need for my tower, her eyebrows shot up. "And the HOA members would have to pay for that through increased fees?" she asked. "That is my understanding." "Have they told the membership about these costs?" "You would have to ask them." The story aired that evening during the 6 o'clock news. I watched it at home, wincing a little at how angry I looked on camera, but the piece was fair. Rebecca had clearly done her homework, pulling up property records and interviewing Martin and Doug Martinez, who both confirmed that they depended on the tower for water. The story ended with Rebecca standing outside the HOA community center, noting that Patricia Morrison had declined to comment. My phone started ringing almost immediately. First was my sister Rachel in Denver, who had seen the story and was furious on my behalf. Then Martin called to say that his phone was blowing up with calls from other HOA members who had no idea what Patricia had been planning. By 9 o'clock, I had a dozen voicemails from people I did not know, mostly HOA members expressing support or asking questions. The real explosion came at the emergency HOA meeting on Saturday morning. Martin recorded it on his phone and sent me the audio file later. I could hear Patricia trying to maintain control as angry members demanded explanations for why they were facing potential special assessments to fund her personal vendetta against a structure that was causing no actual harm. "This is about maintaining property values," Patricia kept insisting. "That tower is an eyesore. It has been there for 70 years, someone shouted back. We bought houses knowing it was there, and now you want us to pay $80,000 because you do not like looking at it. 4 families depend on that water, another voice added. What happens to them during construction? How long will they be without water? That is a temporary inconvenience, Patricia said dismissively. Easy for you to say. Doug Martinez's voice came through clearly. You are not one of the 4 families affected. I have 2 kids and a wife. How are we supposed to manage without water for weeks or months? The meeting apparently lasted nearly 3 hours and ended with a vote to remove Patricia as HOA president. The vote was not even close. 43 in favor of removal, 9 opposed, 3 abstentions. Martin called me right after. She is out, Stephen. They voted her out and installed Bill Henderson as interim president. Bill already said the first thing he is doing is dropping all legal action against you. I felt relief wash over me. Thank God, this whole thing was ridiculous. It is not quite over yet. Patricia is furious. She stood up after the vote and said she was not done, that she would find another way to deal with your tower. Bill had to threaten to call the police to get her to leave. That should have been the end of it. A reasonable person would have accepted defeat and moved on. But as I was learning, Patricia Morrison was not a reasonable person. The following Tuesday, I was in town getting supplies when I ran into Grace Thompson, the elderly woman who lived at 839 Pinecrest. She was in her 80s, a sweet lady who had lived alone since her husband passed away 5 years ago. Stephen, she called out, waving me over in the parking lot. I wanted to thank you for maintaining the water supply all these years. I saw the news story. I had no idea that woman was causing you so much trouble. It is all right, Mrs. Thompson. The HOA dropped the matter. Her expression turned worried. Well, I wanted you to know that Patricia came to my house yesterday. She was asking questions about my water supply and whether I had ever had any problems with water quality or pressure. What did you tell her? The truth. That the water has always been perfect. But Stephen, she seemed very interested in my property line and where the water pipe enters my house. She took pictures of everything. It made me uncomfortable. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. If she contacts you again, let me know immediately, and do not let her onto your property without someone else present. I called Richard as soon as I got home. He agreed that Patricia's behavior was concerning, but pointed out that taking pictures from a public street was not illegal. Still, he advised me to warn the other affected homeowners and keep documenting everything. Thursday afternoon, I got a frantic call from Doug Martinez. Stephen, someone cut my water line. I came home from work and found water spraying everywhere from the pipe near my property line. The shutoff valve had been damaged, so I could not even turn it off properly. I had to dig down to the main connection to stop the flow. I drove to Doug's house immediately. The damage was obvious. Someone had used bolt cutters or something similar to sever the galvanized pipe that ran from my property to his house. The cut was clean and deliberate, not the result of corrosion or accident. Even worse, the valve assembly that would have allowed Doug to shut off water to his house had been smashed with something heavy. This is vandalism, I said, examining the damage. You need to call the police. Doug already had his phone out. Within 30 minutes, a Jefferson County Sheriff's deputy arrived to take a report. Deputy Wilson examined the damage, took photos, and asked Doug if he had any idea who might have done this. I have suspicions, Doug said carefully. There is a woman named Patricia Morrison who has been causing problems over the water supply. She was angry that my house gets water from Stephen's tower. Angry enough to do something like this? I do not know. but she came by my house last week asking questions and taking pictures of the water line. Deputy Wilson took detailed notes and said he would investigate. He also suggested that Doug and the other affected homeowners install security cameras, given the circumstances. I helped Doug repair the water line that evening, working until well past dark to get his family's water restored. The next morning, I drove around to all 4 affected properties and helped them install game cameras pointed at their water line connections. If someone was targeting the water supply, I wanted evidence. We did not have to wait long. On Sunday morning, Martin's camera caught Patricia Morrison on video, approaching his water line with a wrench in hand. The camera was motion-activated and high definition, capturing her face clearly as she knelt next to the pipe. Martin's phone app alerted him immediately, and he ran outside in time to catch her in the act. "What the hell are you doing?" Martin shouted. Patricia straightened up, still holding the wrench. "This is an illegal water connection. I am documenting code violations. With a wrench, get off my property right now or I am calling the police. I have every right to investigate threats to community safety." Martin already had his phone out. "You have 10 seconds to leave before I report you for trespassing and attempted vandalism." Patricia left, but not before Martin got additional video of her walking back to her car and driving away. He immediately sent the video to Deputy Wilson, who called back within an hour. "Mr. Chen, this is clear evidence of attempted vandalism, combined with the actual vandalism at the Martinez property. I am going to seek a warrant for Miss Morrison's arrest." Things moved quickly after that. Patricia was arrested Monday evening at her home. According to the arrest report, which became public record, she was charged with criminal mischief and trespassing. She posted bail Tuesday morning and immediately hired a criminal defense attorney. But Patricia's legal troubles were just beginning. When deputies executed a search warrant on her property, they found bolt cutters in her garage that matched the marks on Doug's water line, along with several printed maps showing the water line routes from my tower to all 4 affected properties. One map had handwritten notes that, according to the police report, outlined plans to systematically disable each connection. The district attorney added additional charges: criminal conspiracy and multiple counts of attempted criminal mischief. If convicted on all counts, Patricia was facing potential jail time and significant fines. The story exploded in the local media. Rebecca Ortiz did a follow-up piece that went viral on social media, framing it as a cautionary tale about HOA overreach and the dangers of petty tyranny in residential communities. Patricia became a local villain, the embodiment of the nightmare HOA president that homeowners everywhere feared. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA held another emergency meeting to discuss the situation. Bill Henderson, the interim president, issued a public apology to me on behalf of the association and offered to reimburse me for any legal fees I had incurred. I appreciated the gesture, though Richard advised me to wait until the criminal case was resolved before settling anything. Patricia's criminal trial was scheduled for August, but her attorney negotiated a plea deal in July. She pleaded guilty to 2 counts of criminal mischief and 1 count of trespassing in exchange for the other charges being dropped. The judge sentenced her to 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered her to pay restitution to Doug Martinez for the damage to his property. She was also required to have no contact with me or any of the affected homeowners. At the sentencing hearing, which I attended, the judge gave Patricia a stern lecture about property rights and the appropriate ways to resolve disputes. "Miss Morrison, You had legitimate legal channels available to you if you truly believed there was a code violation or safety issue, the judge said. Instead, you chose to take matters into your own hands in a way that caused property damage and could have left families without access to clean water. That is unacceptable. This community trusted you with a leadership position, and you abused that trust in pursuit of a personal vendetta. I hope you use your probation period to reflect on the seriousness of your actions. Patricia stood there stone-faced, offering no apology or acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Her attorney had advised her to remain silent, and she followed that advice to the letter. After the sentencing, Doug Martinez approached me outside the courthouse. "Stephen, I just want you to know how much I appreciate everything you did. You could have just shut down the water supply and let us deal with Patricia on our own, but you stuck with us." "I would never do that," I said. "My grandfather built that tower to help people, not to be used as leverage in disputes. Besides, this was never about you or the other homeowners. This was about one person who thought she could bully someone into submission." The Meadowbrook Estates HOA underwent significant changes in the months following Patricia's conviction. Bill Henderson ran for president in the regular election and won by a landslide. One of his first acts was to commission a comprehensive review of the HOA's rules and procedures, specifically focusing on checks and balances to prevent any future president from abusing their authority. The HOA also formally recognized the historic value of my water tower. Bill approached me with a proposal. The HOA would pay for a professional restoration of the tower's exterior, including fresh paint in historically accurate colors, in exchange for my permission to include the tower in their neighborhood marketing materials as a unique historic feature. It was a complete reversal from Patricia's stance, and I agreed readily. The restoration was completed in September. The tower looked magnificent, its red and white paint gleaming in the Colorado sunshine. The restoration company even added a small bronze plaque near the base. Jacobson Water Tower, ESD, 1952, supplying the community for over 70 years. Grace Thompson invited all 4 affected families and me to her house for dinner once the restoration was complete. We sat on her back porch, looking up at the tower on the hill, and she raised her glass in a toast. To Stephen, for maintaining his family's legacy and standing up for what is right, and to his grandfather who had the foresight to build something that would serve this community for generations. We all drank to that. Life returned to normal after that, or as normal as it gets when you are a minor local celebrity. I still got recognized occasionally in town, and people would want to shake my hand or hear the story firsthand. The tower continued doing exactly what it had always done, supplying fresh, clean water to 4 families and reminding everyone who saw it that sometimes the old ways are better than blind conformity to modern aesthetic standards. I did make one change, though. I installed a state-of-the-art security system around the tower and the water lines, with cameras and motion sensors that fed directly to my phone and to a monitoring company. After everything that happened, I was not taking any chances. The system paid for itself in peace of mind alone. Patricia served out her probation without incident, as far as I know. She moved away from Meadowbrook Estates about 6 months after her sentencing, selling her house and disappearing from the area. I heard through Martin that she relocated to Arizona, presumably to find a new community where no one knew her story. I did not waste energy thinking about her. She had made her choices, faced the consequences, and moved on. That was enough for me. The water agreements with the 4 properties were formalized and updated. ensuring that future owners would understand the arrangement and their responsibilities. My attorney drafted new documents that were more detailed than the originals, clearly spelling out maintenance obligations, water quality standards, and dispute resolution procedures. All 4 homeowners signed willingly, and the documents were recorded with the county for posterity. On the 1-year anniversary of the whole mess starting, Martin organized a neighborhood barbecue at his house. It was not an official HOA event, just a gathering of the families on Pinecrest Drive and a few of their friends. We grilled burgers and hot dogs. The kids ran around playing tag, and adults sat in lawn chairs swapping stories as the sun set behind the mountains. "You know what I realized the other day," Martin said, holding a beer and gazing up at the tower. "That structure is probably going to outlast all of us. Your grandfather built something permanent, something that will still be standing 50 or 100 years from now, still doing its job." "That was his intention," I said. "He used to tell me that if you build something right the first time, it will serve people long after you are gone." He was not just talking about engineering. He meant doing things with integrity, thinking about the long term, considering how your actions affect others. Patricia never understood that, Doug added. She was so focused on the short term, on how things looked rather than how they functioned, that she could not see past her own nose. "Some people are like that," I said. "They get an idea in their head about how things should be, and they cannot accept that maybe their way is not the only way or even the best way. My grandfather had a saying about that too: function before fashion, substance before style." As darkness fell and the party wound down, I helped Martin clean up and then walked back to my truck. The tower rose against the night sky, its red aircraft warning light blinking steadily at the top. That light had been there for decades too, warning pilots away, a small but important safety feature that my grandfather had installed long before it was required by regulation. I drove home thinking about legacy and stubbornness, about the difference between standing up for something meaningful and just being obstinate. There had been moments during the conflict with Patricia when I wondered if I was being too rigid, too unwilling to compromise. But compromise would have meant abandoning the people who depended on the water supply, or knuckling under to someone who was simply wrong. Some things are worth fighting for, and this had been one of them. The legal costs had been substantial, even with the HOA's reimbursement. Richard's bill had been fair, but defending against Patricia's attacks had not been cheap. Still, I did not regret a penny of it. Some expenses are investments in principle, in showing that bullies do not win just because they are louder or more aggressive than everyone else. In the months that followed, I noticed small changes in how the Meadowbrook Estates HOA operated. They were more transparent, holding public forums where residents could voice concerns without being shut down. They published detailed financial reports quarterly, showing exactly where HOA funds were being spent. And they created a formal process for complaints that required documentation and evidence before any action could be taken. Bill Henderson deserved credit for those reforms. He had stepped into a difficult situation and actually worked to make things better rather than just consolidating his own power. That is leadership, the real kind, not the petty tyranny that Patricia had practiced. I also started getting calls from other property owners around Colorado, and even from other states, who were facing similar situations with their HOAs. Word had spread about my case, and people wanted advice on how to fight back against unreasonable demands. I was not a lawyer, so I could not offer legal advice, but I could share my experience and encourage people to stand firm when they were in the right. One caller, a man from Wyoming named Michael, was particularly memorable. His HOA was demanding he remove a solar panel array from his property, claiming it was unsightly. The panels provided 80% of his home's electricity, but the HOA did not care. They wanted uniform roof lines and were threatening massive fines if he did not comply. What should I do? Michael asked. Get a good attorney, I told him. Document everything. Know your rights, know your property boundaries, and do not back down if you are legally in the right. These battles are not fun, but sometimes they are necessary. And remember, you are not just fighting for yourself. You are setting a precedent for everyone else who might face similar situations in the future. Michael took my advice and ultimately won his case when his attorney demonstrated that Wyoming's solar rights law specifically prohibited HOAs from banning solar installations. His HOA backed down and even apologized. He called me afterward to thank me for the encouragement. I almost gave up, he admitted. The stress was overwhelming, and it would have been easier to just remove the panels and pay higher electric bills. But then I thought about your story, about standing up for what is right even when it is hard. That gave me the courage to keep fighting. Stories like that reminded me why the whole ordeal with Patricia had been worthwhile. It was not just about my tower or my property rights. It was about standing against the kind of petty authoritarianism that makes people miserable in their own homes, that values appearance over substance and conformity over common sense. The tower itself became something of a local landmark. Tourists driving through the area would sometimes stop to take pictures, especially after a travel blogger wrote about it as an example of authentic Colorado history surviving in the age of suburban sprawl. The blog post was a bit dramatic, but it drove enough traffic that the Jefferson County Tourism Board actually contacted me about including the tower in their historical sites brochure. I agreed, with one condition. Any materials about the tower had to tell the whole story, including its functional purpose and the recent fight to save it. The tourism board readily agreed, and the tower appeared in their next brochure with a full paragraph explaining its history and ongoing role in the community. My family was proud of how things had turned out. My sister Rachel, who had been supportive throughout the ordeal, brought her kids out to visit during Thanksgiving that year. My nephew Jake, who was 12, looked up at the tower with obvious awe. "That is so cool, Uncle Stephen. And you built this." "My grandfather built it, but I maintain it." "I will teach you how if you are interested." Jake's eyes lit up. "Really? That would be awesome." Over the long holiday weekend, I taught Jake the basics of tower maintenance, how to inspect the structure for stress points, how to test water quality, and how to read the pressure gauges that monitored the system. He was a quick learner, and watching his enthusiasm reminded me of why this all mattered. The tower was not just about water or property rights. It was about passing something meaningful down to the next generation, about teaching kids that they could create things of lasting value if they were willing to work hard and think beyond themselves. Rachel pulled me aside on their last day of the visit. "Jake has not stopped talking about the tower. He is already planning to study engineering in college so he can build things like Grandpa did. You have made a real impact on him, Stephen." "Grandpa made the impact," I said. "I am just the caretaker." "No," Rachel said firmly. "You fought for this. You could have given up, torn it down, and avoided all the conflict. But you did not, and now there is something here for future generations. That matters more than you know." As Christmas approached, I received an unexpected card in the mail. It was from Grace Thompson, and inside was a handwritten note. "Dear Stephen, I am writing to thank you for your courage and integrity during this difficult year. When my late husband and I moved to our home 30 years ago, your father assured us that the water supply would always be reliable, and it has been. I know your grandfather started this tradition, and I am grateful that you have continued it. Please know that you have made my golden years much easier. I never worry about my water supply, and that is a precious gift. Wishing you and yours a blessed Christmas. With gratitude, Grace. I put the card on my mantle where I could see it every day. It was a reminder that what I did mattered to real people, that the tower was not just an abstract principle, but a practical necessity that affected people's daily lives. The winter passed quietly. The tower operated flawlessly, as it always did, supplying water through freezing temperatures and occasional snowstorms. I did my regular maintenance checks, monitoring for ice buildup and ensuring the heating elements that prevented freezing were working properly. Everything functioned exactly as my grandfather had designed it to. In February, Bill Henderson called with news. "Stephen, I wanted you to hear this from me first. The HOA board voted last night to formally recognize your property and the water tower as a historic resource. We are amending our bylaws to specifically state that pre-existing historic structures are exempt from architectural review standards. We are calling it the Jacobson Amendment." I was speechless for a moment. "Bill, I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything. It is the right thing to do. Your fight with Patricia taught us a valuable lesson about respecting history and not letting aesthetic preferences override common sense. We want to make sure nothing like this ever happens again, not just to you, but to anyone in a similar situation." "I appreciate that more than you know. There is one more thing," Bill continued. "We would like to hold a small ceremony in the spring, maybe April or May, to officially unveil the amendment and the restored tower. Would you be willing to speak at it? Nothing fancy, just a few words about your grandfather and the tower's history." I agreed, and plans were set in motion. The ceremony was scheduled for the first Saturday in May, pending good weather. As the date approached, I worked on my remarks, trying to capture what the tower meant to me and what the fight to preserve it had represented. It was harder than I expected. The story was complicated, involving family history, property rights, community conflict, and ultimately resolution. How do you sum all that up in a few minutes without boring people or sounding preaky in the end? I decided to keep it simple and personal. I would talk about my grandfather, about the values he instilled in me, and about the importance of building things that last. The rest would take care of itself. The ceremony drew a surprisingly large crowd. All 4 families from Pinecrest Drive came, of course, along with most of the Meadowbrook estate's residents. But there were also people from surrounding areas, some I recognized from town and others I had never met. The Jefferson County Commissioner attended, as did a representative from the State Historical Society. Even Rebecca Ortiz showed up with a camera crew to cover the event. Bill Henderson opened the ceremony with brief remarks about the HOA's evolution over the past year and the lessons learned from the conflict. Then he introduced me, and I walked up to the makeshift podium they had set up at the base of the tower. Looking out at the crowd, I saw friendly faces and curious strangers, all gathered around a structure that had stood on this hill for over 70 years. I pulled out my notes, then decided to speak from the heart instead. My grandfather built this tower in 1952 with his own hands and the help of a few friends from town, I began. The valley was being settled, and people needed water, but the county lines did not reach this far and individual wells were not practical for everyone. So my grandfather did what people did back then. He solved the problem. He drilled a deep well, built this tower to provide pressure and storage, and then extended the supply to his neighbors who needed it. He did not do it for profit. He did it because it was the right thing to do, because a community takes care of its own. I paused, gathering my thoughts. A few months ago, someone tried to tear this down because they thought it was ugly. They did not care about its function or its history or the families who depended on it. They only cared about how it looked from their window, and I had a choice. I could fight back, or I could give in and let something valuable be destroyed for no good reason. The crowd was silent, listening. I continued. I am not a crusader. I am just a guy trying to honor his family's legacy and do right by his neighbors. But I learned something through this ordeal. I learned that sometimes standing up for what is right is not optional. Sometimes you have to fight, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is expensive, even when it would be easier to walk away. Because if good people do not stand up against bullies and petty tyrants, then the bullies win, and we cannot let that happen. I gestured up at the tower behind me. This structure will probably stand for another 70 years or more. Long after I am gone, it will still be here, still doing its job. That is what my grandfather intended when he built it. He was thinking about the future, about the people who would come after him. That is the kind of legacy worth fighting for. The applause started slowly but built to something genuine and sustained. People stood up, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment and pride. Bill shook my hand, and then others came forward to offer congratulations and share their own stories of conflicts with HOAs or battles over historic properties. The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of the amended HOA bylaws, professionally printed and framed. Bill presented me with a copy, which now hangs in my living room next to the original water rights documents from my grandfather's time. After the ceremony, there was a reception in Martin's backyard. People mingled, ate sandwiches and cookies, and talked about property rights and community values and what it means to be a good neighbor. It felt like something important had happened, like we had affirmed something essential about how we wanted to live. Grace Thompson approached me near the end of the reception, moving slowly with her cane. "Stephen, that was a wonderful speech. Your grandfather would have been very proud." "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. That means a lot." "I want you to know something," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "When that awful woman came to my house asking questions about the water supply, I knew she was up to no good. I did not tell you at the time, but she suggested I sue you for something called an attractive nuisance, claiming the tower was dangerous and might collapse on my property. She said I could probably get a settlement that would pay for county water lines. I felt a surge of anger at Patricia's memory. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that I had lived in my house for 30 years, that I had never had a moment's worry about the tower, and that she should be ashamed of herself for trying to turn neighbors against each other. Then I told her to get off my property." Grace smiled. She was not happy, but she left. "I wish you had told me at the time. I did not want to worry you. You had enough to deal with, but I wanted you to know now so you understand how far she was willing to go. That woman was dangerous, Stephen, not just annoying or petty, but genuinely dangerous. She was willing to destroy people's lives to get her way. Well, she failed, and hopefully she learned something from it." Grace shook her head. "People like that rarely learn, but at least she cannot hurt anyone here anymore, and you created something good out of her nastiness. That ceremony today, the new bylaws, the way this community came together, that is all because you stood firm. Never underestimate the value of that." As spring turned to summer, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The tower required its usual maintenance. The 4 connected households paid their annual fees on time, and the Meadowbrook Estates HOA operated smoothly under Bill's leadership. Patricia's name came up less and less, fading into the status of an unfortunate memory. I did get one final reminder of her in July. when Deputy Wilson called to let me know that Patricia had been arrested again in Arizona for harassing her new neighbors over a fence dispute. Apparently, she had not learned her lesson and was right back to her old behavior in a new location. "Just thought you would want to know," Deputy Wilson said. "Some people never change. At least this time it is someone else's problem, not yours." I thanked him for the update and hung up, feeling a mixture of vindication and sadness. Patricia had squandered so much energy on being angry and controlling, when she could have put that effort into building something positive. It was a waste, but it was her choice to make. The summer was productive and peaceful. I made some improvements to my property, finally getting around to repairing the barn roof and upgrading some of the fencing on the north side. Jake came out for 2 weeks in August, and I taught him more about the tower's operation and maintenance. He was genuinely interested, asking intelligent questions and taking detailed notes. It gave me hope that when my time came, there would be someone capable of taking over. On a warm September evening, I sat on my porch with a cold beer, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink behind the tower. The metal framework cast long shadows across the hillside, and the aircraft warning light blinked on automatically as darkness approached. Everything was as it should be, as it had been for decades, as it would continue to be for decades more. My phone buzzed with a text from Martin. "Hey, we are having folks over for dinner Saturday. You should come. Bill and his wife will be there and Grace. Just a casual thing." I texted back my acceptance. These were my people now, not just neighbors but friends forged through conflict and resolution. We had been through something together, something that could have torn the community apart, but instead had made it stronger. That Saturday dinner was exactly what Martin had promised, casual and comfortable. We ate grilled chicken and corn on the cob, the kids playing in the yard while the adults talked and laughed on the deck. At one point, Bill raised his glass. "I want to propose a toast," he said. "To Stephen, for reminding us what really matters, and to this community for learning from its mistakes and becoming better." We drank to that, and then Martin added his own toast. "And to towers, water supplies, and stubborn men who refuse to back down when they are right." That got a laugh, and I felt warmth that had nothing to do with the beer. This was what my grandfather had envisioned when he built the tower. Not just a water supply, but a foundation for community, for people helping each other and standing together when it mattered. The years since then have been quiet, in the best possible way. The tower continues its work, I continue mine, and the Meadowbrook Estates HOA has become a model for how such organizations should operate. Bill wrote an article for a property management magazine about the reforms they implemented, and other HOAs around the country have started adopting similar measures. The tower has become part of the community's identity, featured in their welcome packets for new residents and pointed out on the neighborhood map. When people ask about it, the response is always positive. That is the Jacobson water tower. It has been serving this area since 1952. We are lucky to have it. That shift in perspective from eyesore to asset represents everything the fight was about. It proved that history has value, that function matters more than fashion, and that communities thrive when they respect their roots rather than trying to erase them. I am in my 50s now, still healthy and capable of maintaining the tower for years to come. But I have started documenting everything even more thoroughly, creating detailed manuals and video tutorials so that whoever comes after me will have all the information they need. Jake has already said he wants to inherit the property someday, and I am training him to be ready for that responsibility. The legacy continues, as my grandfather intended. The tower stands tall on its hill, visible for miles, a testament to one man's ingenuity and 3 generations of commitment to community. It survived Patricia's attack, not because I was particularly heroic, but because some things are simply worth fighting for. And when you stand up for what is right, when you refuse to be bullied or intimidated, good things happen. That is the lesson I take from all of this, and the lesson I hope to pass on to Jake and anyone else who will listen. Build things that last, maintain them with integrity, and never let anyone tell you that something valuable should be destroyed just because they do not appreciate it. The world needs more towers, both literal and figurative, and more people willing to defend them. The sun sets behind my tower every evening, painting it gold and red in the fading light. Aircraft warning lights blink on. 4 households have fresh water for dinner and dishes and evening showers. And somewhere in Arizona, Patricia Morrison is probably making someone else miserable. But here in Jefferson County, Colorado, on 50 acres that have been in my family for generations, everything is exactly as it should be. And that is enough.